The most unusual thing I ever saw in plasticity was two young girls, 10 years old and 12 years old, profoundly deaf. Now that means they've lost one of their senses. They can hear some sounds, but they can't make much sense of them. Our brain does all of that kind of thing, so it's missing one of the most important central devices we have. Now listen what the brain did for these girls. I was in Paris at the time with the UN, and an American family invited me to come have dinner with them and introduce me to their daughters. These two girls, 10 and 12, could lip read English, German, and French. You tell me how. You talk about plasticity. The brain can take over different pathways when it needs to, if it has the support of the body. And I'll get into what support is necessary. Absolutely unbelievable. It all had to be through vision, didn't it? Vision and movement with the arms. To be able to learn that kind of thing, I don't fathom it yet. And I was an educator for 50 years, and I don't know how this happened. But talk about the brain being able to do things, we have no idea what it can do. Also, I'd like to talk about another experience that Helen referred to. Observing things that are around us, the environment and so on. When I was 12 years old, I was up in New York with my dad, New York City. And we were walking up Fifth Avenue, and he grabbed my arm, which meant some important question or something is coming, and he said, "Bob, did you hear that?" Any educator knows that's a horrible question. In the middle of New York, did you hear that? What? Well, I knew it was nothing that I heard if he heard it. And I didn't want to say, yes, I did, because I'd have to explain it then. And if I said no, we were going to go look for it, which is going to be embarrassing on Fifth Avenue. So, but being honesty is one of the things I was taught. So I said, no, Dad, I didn't hear. What did you hear? He says, I heard a cricket. In New York City on Fifth Avenue, you heard a cricket? He said, yeah. And he goes for his pocket knife. We go over beside the building, dig in the mortar, and out comes a little cricket. And he says, didn't you hear that? No, I wasn't attuned to things like that. He said, well, I'll put it back. They put it back in there, and he said, we'll wait about 30 seconds and listen. And off it went, making all kinds of noise that I could hear. And he said, do you hear it now? Oh, yes, it was so loud. How could I miss it? I wasn't attuned to it. That's how I missed it. But he said, watch this. And he took a little coin out of his pocket and held it 2 inches above the sidewalk and dropped it. That little coin went ting-a-ling, made about 1/10 the decibels of that cricket. And people within a 10-foot circle turned around. We need to be attuned to what's going on around us. The whole world is there. The environment is there. Let's pay attention to it. It's important. Now, you may have read that story in one of David Suzuki's books. Did you? He talked about a farmer in New York City doing that. No, it wasn't a farmer, me. Now, how did he get a farmer out of this? Alzheimer's, I think. He couldn't remember. Because his professor and I worked together. And he must have told him this story, and he liked the story, but he couldn't remember how it worked. So when David Suzuki was here, guess what? I was able to say, David, that's me, and this is how it happened, and here's your professor who told you about it. He agreed on that. Now, just one more thing on plasticity. Talked about how we can start moving the hands and so on when we want to be able to do something. I worked with a group in the US with pets going into nursing homes and so on what that could do. We know that petting a dog lowers your blood pressure quite easily. But these were people that had chronic problems. Their hands were just knurled. They had to be fed because they couldn't pick up anything. We took pets into that home and set them down beside the person, and you could just see them straining. to get that hand over there. They wanted to pet that dog. In 3 weeks, he was feeding himself. The brain can do it if we set our minds the right way. There was the incentive to do it. The kinds of things that Helen talked about, doing puzzles, doing all these other things, are the incentives to make our mind work. Okay, that's enough of stories for a little while. Now, I'd like to get back to what I'm supposed to be talking about. I'm the ambassador with Council on the Aging for Living Longer, Living Stronger. It's an exercise program. And it says on there, healthy aging and nutrition. Okay, quite short. You should exercise regularly and eat all kinds of things. Any questions? She's alluded to some of it. Well, let me talk a little bit about why. Let me talk about the brain just a little bit, on how the brain works. Helen said the brain is about 2% of our body mass. And it uses 20 to 25% of the energy in the body at any one time. That's a huge disparity from anything else, isn't it? 25% of the energy is up there. Why? Because there's an awful lot going on. Do you know how many neurons we estimate there are in the brain? Any idea? I have a figure, but I don't know what it means. 86 billion. That's 86 and 9 zeros. Anybody have any idea what that means? It's something like national debts. I don't know what that means either. That means we just borrow money that we don't have. Now, that's an awful lot of stuff in there, and each one of those neurons has to be fed and nourished. That's where nutrition becomes important. It has to get in there. And every one of those neurons, we now know in research, has glia cells that are looking after them. 2 to 10 glia cells for every neuron. Can you imagine what that figure is? That's 10 zeros. They all have to have nutrition also to work. Huge amount of work to get this all working. Now, you all know how nutrition gets around the body, don't you? Yes? No? Maybe? Somewhere in between. You all know it's the blood that takes it all around. Gets all the things around there that you need to have in the brain. And up to 1/3 of our blood at any time in our body is up in our brain. Quite congested, isn't it? Think of what all is going on up there. Huge, huge amounts of work are going on. Now, you know that the blood carries things. So here's the reason you have to exercise. Let's talk a little bit about how the blood gets around. Everybody knows how the heart works. Yes? No? Maybe? Okay. What does the heart do? Everybody, what does the heart do? Pumps blood. Where? Okay, around the body because it's a closed system. But the only place that it pumps is out. Right? How does it get back in? Okay, you can tell me all the physics. It's a closed system, so it goes around. But you know, as soon as the blood is pumped out of the heart, there's a thing called gravity down there that just pulls the blood right down. And we all move around up here, you notice, when we're speaking. That's to keep the blood going. Otherwise, my fingers would begin to swell, my ankles would begin to swell. Why? Gravity. Pulls the blood down. Now the heart has to pump extra hard to be able to pump all that stuff back up the other side against gravity. That would be a tremendous strain called blood pressure, unless we help it out. That's why you need to exercise. Everybody in here past 30? I can see yes. After you are 30, you begin to lose muscle mass unless you exercise. That's why you need to exercise. And you need to do resistance exercise to keep up the musculature. So you can keep your balance, you can lift things better, but mainly to help the blood. Because if we have a little more muscle mass, every time we move our appendages, we squeeze blood vessels, which help to push the blood back up to the heart. Just a little bit about anatomy. Your arteries are between the muscles and the bones. They're protected in there. Your veins are between the muscles and the skin. So every time you expand the muscle, you're pushing against a vein, which means if you move your legs around and you move your arms around, you're pushing the blood up to the next valve, to the next valve, to the next valve. So if your muscles are stronger, they're helping the heart. And your heart says, thank you. And your blood pressure goes down because it doesn't have to push as hard. That means circulation gets around the body more regularly, easier, more efficiently. That means all of the glands, all of the cells in the body are getting more nutrition more often, which means they function better. They produce the hormones that we need. Helen alluded to several of them: serotonin, endorphins, dopamine, all get up into the brain. And we have shown through research that if you exercise with resistance, we are able often to stabilize Alzheimer's. Not cure it, stabilize it. Which means you have a better life longer. We have slowed the decline. That's positive. And who's responsible for all that? You. No medicine, exercise. It's our responsibility. I could give you a whole list of things that we can use that can be stabilized, or in some cases even cured, through resistance exercise. I should have a great big sign up here to say, exercise is medicine. The body will do it, and it'll take care of the brain if we can keep the heart functioning. So, we now know that there's going to be a little connection between the heart and the brain. We have to get the food up there to support this. But it's difficult because the brain doesn't act like other things very well. I've told you how many neurons there are up there. They're the cells, and there's a space between them where we have to get messages across. Helen referred to ACTH, that's one of them, getting the message across there. Now, you have to get the right things into that brain to be able to do that. And you can say, well, the blood takes it up there. It sure does. But between the blood and the brain, there is an extra barrier called the blood-brain barrier. So things don't automatically get through there. They have to have little ferries or carriers to get across that barrier. And guess what? Those things take whatever comes there first. First come, first served. So if the brain needs something and you haven't eaten the right things, it doesn't get it because it's not there, ready to go. Which means you have to have a good nutrition to be able to supply all those things that are necessary. Two very important things that have to get across there. One is glucose, which she referred to the mitochondria. That's where all the energy is produced. And you have to get across some amino acids. We have to have the amino acids in there to formulate the neurotransmitters that carry this message across. All this gets fairly complicated. But basic to it is having all the nutrition there ready to go across when the carriers are willing to take it. So that the brain has the supply that it needs. You begin to get the idea that there's a pretty good connection between heart and the brain and your musculature. If any one of them is not working correct, it affects the other. So now we're getting kind of set up. We get the right things up there. I haven't gotten to what they are yet, but we'll get to that. They have to get there so that they can be taken across whenever the carriers want to take it across. And it's this message between the neurons that is the plasticity. It usually goes this way, but if something gets blocked with one of the alpha amyloids, it can go that way and come around. It does its thing. It makes up for what's not there. It can change the direction in which things happen. That's what we call neuroplasticity. Different directions for the messages to get around. Now just think about how much energy has to be up there all the time. The brain never stops. Think about that. It controls all of your unconscious nerve things. Wouldn't you get tired if you had to think, I have to breathe now, I have to make my heart beat, I have to make this muscle work, I have to digest some food, I have to make convulsions in the stomach, so we mix up things. If you had to think about that all the time, you'd never get anything else done. That's all unconscious thought that the brain is working on constantly. It has to have energy to do all that. While you're asleep, that just keeps right on going. But when you're awake, that still is ongoing, plus you're adding all the things that you are doing each day. Every little bit that comes in through your eyes, through your ears, through your nose, through feelings, has to be interpreted in the brain and made sense of. And then decide, what do we do about all that? It's kind of complicated, isn't it? Fantastic how it works. If you had any machine that did all the things that the brain does and treat it like we do, the machine wouldn't work. But ours keeps going because it has the resilience to do all that. But we have to treat it in the right way. We have to exercise so that the heart keeps working correctly, so that we get the things up there. Have I made enough point of that? Another thing about it is that within exercise, and I'm talking about resistance exercise, which means a little bit of extra weight. Now, any exercise is worthwhile, as Helen's mentioned. I mean, if you walk through a doorway, you can do some isotonic exercise. Just stop, put your hands against the side of the door, and push for 10 seconds. That's exercise. You're pushing a muscle. Then relax. And do it again. When you start getting good at it, you do these 15 times and relax. You can do exercises at home. You don't have to go to a gym, but the gym programs are good because they measure what muscles need work, which ones don't need work, how much weight this one needs, that one needs, and they monitor you all the time so they can keep working on you. But you can do it at home. If I do this 15 times, how much muscle have I built? None. Because that's just normal. No resistance. But if I put 1 tin of soup there and do that 15 times, you might feel it a little bit. If not, rest and then do it again 15 times. And I'll guarantee you will start to feel something. That's building a little bit of muscle. Hasn't extended your life much, but you've built a little bit of muscle. When that gets easy, a kilo of sugar, do it 15 times. I'll guarantee you feel that. When that gets easier, make it heavier if you want to, or get something else. Push on the wall. Get on your back, put your feet on the wall, push. That's resistance. That's muscle. You're building a little bit of muscle. That's extremely important. You notice I keep moving, swinging, my arms are going and so on. Every one of you, you're sitting here listening to me now for 40 minutes, you should have stood up at least twice in that time. Don't. But every time you're home and you want to watch TV, whenever there's a commercial, walk out to the kitchen and get a drink of water. Never do the channels with the zapper. Get up and walk over and punch it. That's exercise. You're extending your life. Just that little bit makes a difference. Have I sold you on exercise yet? I can talk for days on this, but I hope you're getting the message. And it's needed for the heart and for the brain. Now, what kinds of foods do we need to eat? The answer is everything. Any other questions? But mostly importantly, and Helen mentioned this, it's the colors. The variety of colors in your fruits and vegetables. The more color you have there, the darker the colors, probably you're getting more flavonoids, which are antioxidants in some language, and they're the things that stop the inflammation. So you need to get lots of those. But the important part is you get them in as natural a form as possible. The more it's changed from what it was at harvesting or picking, the less you get from it. Now, it may sound a little strange, but if you think back, our bodies have evolved getting things from the land. That's what we've lived on. 1 million years ago, it was a long ways to Coles or Woolies. But we've existed. How? Off the land. Our bodies have evolved getting the goodness out of those things. The further we get away from that goodness, the less goodness there is. So, the less processing, the more goodness your body can get out of it. And you heard about the omega-3s. If you get them from fruits and vegetables, they are much better than from any place else. So eat your nuts, eat your fruits, eat your vegetables. Don't peel them every time. Some things we have to take the peelings off of. But when you take the peeling off of things, you are often losing not only the fiber, but the minerals. Let me give you an example. Potatoes. Everybody in here eats potatoes? Yes. Mashed potatoes? Yes. Do you take the skins off? Yes? No? Sometimes? Maybe? If you take the skin off the potato, next time you do that, look underneath. And there's a little different color under there. That's where the minerals are that your body needs to make vitamins. We make some of our vitamins. Some come from the fruits and vegetables. But underneath that skin of that potato is where the minerals are in a potato. If you take off the skin, you are left with a little bit of protein and a lot of carbohydrates, which are not bad. They're good for you. They're natural. The carbohydrates in your body are changed into sugars and finally into glucose, which goes across the brain barrier to provide all of the energy that you need. Now, carbohydrates provide a great bit of the sugars that we need. If you want to know what happens to carbohydrates, take a saltine biscuit of some kind. In the US, they're crackers. And set it on your tongue. Just let it sit there for about 10 seconds, and it'll start changing to sweet. Your saliva is already starting to break down the carbohydrates into some sugars, changing the starch to sugars. That will continue on, but it begins in your mouth. Try it out sometime. We have to have the glucose to provide all of the energy. You all remember your biochemistry from being in school? How the mitochondria work, how the Krebs cycle works, the citric acid cycle, changing all these things into ATP and ADP. Remember all those? No? Oh, that's too bad. Well, all your energy in your body comes from the mitochondria, because they are changing glucose to sugar and attaching little phosphate molecules onto a big protein. That's called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Tri means three, doesn't it? So that means there are three phosphates added on to that little thing. Now, in going through the mitochondria, one little molecule is snapped off, and we end up with ADP, adenosine diphosphate. The breaking of that one bond is your energy. Amazing, isn't it? It all happens in every cell in your body. Mitochondria, powerhouse. So we have to provide glucose, which is sugar. What did Helen say about sugars? Do you remember? All sugars are bad? Some sugars are bad? You got to make a choice here, folks. Come on. We don't know. Helen said, refined sugars are toxic to your liver. I'm trying to get, as Helen is, to get labeling changed. I don't care how much sugar there is in something. What I want to know is how much added sugar is in there. Because the sugars in the foods are natural sugars. The added sugars are the refined stuff to make it taste better or make it last longer. And we do not need those. She told you how little you need. If we take the added sugars out, we'd be much healthier than we are now. I was very fortunate. My mother was diabetic. So I grew up with very little sugar. Lots of vegetables, lots of fruits, which was very good. I missed it. I loved ice cream, but I have it now because my mother's dead. And ice cream is one of my vegetables. So I have my vegetables every day. But it's a refined sugar. So when you're looking at what to eat and you're looking at things and you see how much sugar, all you can do is take the same kinds of things with the least amount of sugar. But the important part would be, is it added sugar? Because our bodies cannot really work with that. And in nutrition, we need to take the things that have the least amount of processing. I've mentioned that. So that means as close to what it was originally. And how much do we need to eat? We have a thing in the world right now called obesity, which leads to type 2 diabetes. Most of us have grown up with too much food. A recent study I read comparing the amount served in restaurants in the US and Australia from 1960 to 2005. In the US, it's increased by a factor of 3. 3 times as much food on the plate in restaurants. In Australia, we're much better off, only 2 times as much, which is 1 time more than you need. My wife and I have been sharing meals for 20 years because too much food in the restaurants. I can't eat that much, and I don't like to waste. All we have to do is ask, could you give us a smaller helping? I remember being in a steakhouse here in Perth, and a fellow came and said, what will you have? And we said, well, I think we'll have an entree and a salad. And he looked at me aghast and said, this is a steakhouse. I said, yeah, I know that. But your smallest steak is 250 grams, and all I need is 100. Would you like for me to cut it in 2? They will do it. So all of us need to get on the boat and begin asking for smaller meals for older people. We don't need all of that. It's a waste. And we've been taught to clean our plates, haven't we? My mother said, clean your plate. And before she died, she changed that to clean your plate if you put the food on it. If somebody else put too much on, that's their problem. Your problem is eating it all. Don't. And so we need to eat until we are satisfied, not till we are full. Quite a difference. And you don't eat your fruits and vegetables and all those things that come as natural as possible. Now, what about cooking this stuff? Helen mentioned that some of the fats, if you heat them up, are carcinogenic. That's not good. So you want to stay away from those, or don't heat them too much. So what do? Cook until it's palatable. Don't overcook because you are taking the goodness out of the food. Steaming is always better than boiling. You look at the things in the water, you see the colors in there? Those are the nutrients. Those are the minerals. You're pouring them down the drain. So steam them. And every one of you have a steamer at home, I'll bet, don't you? It's called a microwave. Did you know that? A microwave is a steamer. You may not know how a microwave works. It steams from the inside out. The only thing that a microwave can heat are liquids. So it heats the liquid in that food and steams it from inside. And you've kept all the goodness. So as much as possible, steam or microwave your things rather than boiling them, and you'll have much more nutrition left in it. So I know you expected me to talk about eat this food, eat this food, eat this food, how much of this, and so on. And I won't talk about which things we might add. The great ads for this will save you from dementia if you eat this and don't eat that, and so on. Your body will select what it wants. Your brain is very selective in what it needs, so you have to supply all of it, but in the best way possible. So you need to have all the different kinds of foods available. You need to exercise to keep the heart functioning so that you get the nutrition up to the brain. And you will have a wonderful life. Do it.